Everybody, Jim Ostrowski, doing another test broadcast. Nothing to say, nothing to see here, folks. Move along. Just an aging libertarian operative out for a walk before he starts his day job. Actually, I haven't had a job since the 80s. It has its pluses and minuses. One of the negatives is that you're really never off work. You're always sort of on duty. Seriously, true. So yeah, I'm using Restream. Sorry about that. Something on my cell phone. Very annoying. Wow, that is really annoying. Okay, can't do anything about it. So I've got 7 platforms. I've got one more to go. Some people want me to use TikTok. I don't know much about TikTok. I'm not going to repeat the usual views of TikTok, but I am sort of curious to whether I should use it. What are the pluses and minuses? Because somebody told me it was just for short videos, not like 1-hour programs. Is it a spy software? I mean, I think all software is a spy software, and unfortunately, privacy is dead. That's why liberty is important, by the way. It's not so much. Yeah, privacy is important, sure, but liberty's important because if in a world where there's really no secrets anymore, there's no privacy. It's important that people can't use that information against you, and that's the function of liberty, is to protect you. Now, and I think on privacy, there's a distinction between private firms and the government, because Apple wants to sell me an iPhone. I don't think Apple. Now, granted, things got sinister in the last few years in big pharma. That's a big asterisk. I think the typical business doesn't really have a sinister worldview where they want to destroy your life. They just want to sell you stuff. And I'm not denying there are some sinister corporations, and I'm not denying that the line between the private and the public sector has been totally blurred. I get that. Not stupid. Do I look stupid to you? It's one of my favorite lines. But mainly, it's the government that is what we need privacy from, because the government is this big colossal agency of aggressive force, and the more the more they know about you, the more likely they are to intervene in your life in some really nasty way. So TikTok privacy, I mean, there's no privacy anymore. So I guess that's not that big of a deal. But I'd like to get everybody's opinion about TikTok. I've got one more to go. I'm just tired. I'm tired of programming stuff, and I'm really kind of going for the low-hanging fruit. And this is just an experiment anyway. I'm trying to think of what else. So did do a post on Morning Joe. Since we're getting closer to the election, I do look in on Morning Joe, at least for a few minutes. Of course, and it's a 4-hour program. And the funny thing is, whenever you tune into Morning Joe in the 4 hours from 6 to 10, they're always talking about Trump. So I view Morning Joe as you go to Morning Joe to get the deep state line. You get the CIA line. You get the Washington establishment line, the Uniparty, and most of the stuff they say there is just complete and utter nonsense and lies. But it's for somebody like me, it's really important to know what people like that are saying, because they're pretty much running the country right now. So you check in Morning Joe, and they're talking about slavery. It's like, because after all, slavery just ended last year. What year is this? 1866. So it was just last year that Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. Did he run out of bullets or food? I think it was food, actually. These men were starving and had no shoes. He's down to 10,000 troops, I believe. But Grant eventually got him. They had more money, more cannon fodder. And Grant wore him down. So, slavery. So why are they talking about slavery? I'm not going to talk about Nikki Haley. Who cares? She's got 10% in the polls. Who cares? There's a real specific reason that they're still talking about slavery. And that is this: the reason why overall blacks have made such disappointing progress on average. Many of them have done very well, but on average, is not slavery. It's not slavery. I wrote a little monograph about this that's on Kindle. It's called "Progressive Big Government's War on Black People." 1865 through 2022, whenever it was published. So that's a big fucking lie. Like everything, and everything, cause of the Civil War, not cause of the Civil War. Everything you learn about this. I mean, what's the point of even talking about the Civil War in any serious way when you're talking with unserious people who are ignorant, know nothing, don't want to know anything, and learned a bunch of lies in government school, not only about the Civil War, about every other fucking war and every other thing in American history. I mean, why do you expect a school system set up by the government to tell you anything other than the government is fucking great? So, but back to why they're talking about slavery is more important than the actual discussion, because again, this is not a serious country. This is not a country of intellectuals. This is not a country of scholars. It's a country mainly of ignoramuses. So what's the point of talking about slavery? And granted, my audience is obviously far more brilliant than the average person, but still, it'll get picked up in places. But I've written about the subject at length. Written 2 massive essays on the Civil War, and I stand by what I wrote in those 2 essays. So, but why they're talking about slavery? So after slavery ended, this is one of the grand historical myths of American history, and I guess to back a little bit into the discussion, the reason they want, the myth is that the Civil War was fought, for the benefit of slaves and to free the slaves. Well, but that's obviously not true. And the proof of it is, why were slaves treated so badly after the Civil War? If everybody cared about, the slaves. So slavery slavery was ended, but the slaves were not freed, except they were freed from slavery, but they weren't free. They weren't made free. They weren't granted their liberty. And in fact, ever since slavery was ended by the 13th Amendment, which was ratified by many of the southern states, by the way. I get it. They were under duress, blah, blah, blah. But just that little factoid. Does Bubis Americanus know that several of the southern states voted to ratify the 13th Amendment to end slavery? No, they don't know that. They're never taught that in school. So slavery ended in 1865, but blacks ever since then have been subject to massive violation of their civil liberties. I heard a podcast, actually Styx was talking about how gun control got started after the slaves were freed to make sure they didn't have the means to protect themselves. So that's just one example. But in my monograph, I'm not going to go into that now. This is just a test broadcast, right, where I have nothing to say. In my monograph, I talk about the various waves of regulation, discrimination, exploitation. The episode of the Southern Chain Gang. Blacks would be shut out of employment. Then they'd be arrested for vagrancy. The next thing you know, they're in a chain gang, and some corrupt prison wardens making money selling their slave labor. So again, this is what we're talking about. Slavery was ended, but they weren't made free. So, but in my monograph, I talk about the various waves of discrimination and regulation and oppression from right after the Civil War through the Progressive era was horrible for blacks. The New Deal was horrible for blacks, contrary to popular opinion. Again, everything we've been told is a big fucking lie. But what really put here's the interesting thing about slavery. It wasn't slavery. It's what happened. It's what happened after slavery. So the really interesting thing is, in spite of this abominable treatment that the freed slaves, and we fought the Civil War for the benefit of the slaves. Oh, okay. But then we treated them like shit for the next 120 years. Right. That makes sense. Maybe your theory of history is wrong. You ever think of that, you adults? So, talking about Morning Joe type people, not my audience, of course. So here's the interesting thing: in spite of the fact that they weren't, they were treated abominably, they did have in that era a measure of liberty, particularly some economic liberty. Maybe not political power, whatever. And they were making economic progress, and the black family was largely intact, which is absolutely amazing to point that out. But then what happened? The Great Society. And I'm not going to go into the Great Society here. There's books about it and so on. I lived through it. I lived through it. I saw its immediate consequences because I lived through it. And so the Great Society, all these programs are allegedly going to lift blacks out of poverty and so on. And it all failed. It all blew up. And the result is really this stagnation for 55 years in the black community. And there's a tremendous amount of frustration. This is really important to understand this, because this kind of explains everything that's going on, or many of the things that are going on now. The sort of racial divide, the racial politics in the country since about 2014 with the Ferguson riots. This is really important to understand. And I don't think too many commentators have pointed this out. In fact, I'm not sure anybody has, frankly, because it's kind of my theory. So in order to keep blacks voting Democrat, which they tend to vote, 90% generally, they had to come up with a scapegoat for the obvious failure. Because you drive through the inner city of Buffalo. I did a podcast in the inner city of Buffalo during the summer. You drive through there, it just looks like hell. It looks like hell. There's a lot of people, wandering around, apparently with really not a lot going on positive in their life. You could just sort of tell. And somebody has to take the blame for this again. And the Democrats, again, since they're progressives, and if you've read my book, you should read my book, because I cracked the code of progressivism. Progressivism is a form of therapy. So when progressivism fails, they can't adjust. They can't they don't change their policy, because it's not a rational policy in the first place. It's a form of psychotherapy. So it's not a very good form of psychotherapy, but it is. That's what it is. So they can't ever admit that they're wrong, because they need the therapy. I think Woody Allen has some sort of joke about eggs. I can't quite remember it, but similar concept. So what they do is, and if you study somebody said, after I read your book, I could never watch the news the same way again. It's true. If you study what progressives do when their policies fail, and their policies always fail, every single progressive policy has failed. They seek scapegoats to blame for the failure. And like, not to shift to subjects, but it's not shifting. The obsession that progressives have with gun control is a symptom of this, because the main cause of the United States is a very safe country. I'm out on the bike path now during the day, but still, it's safe. I was out last night on Hurdle Avenue in North Buffalo without a weapon. I was fine. There's no crime, but there are pockets of violence, and it's largely caused by the progressives' failed war on drugs. And some of the dumber progressives say, no, Nixon started that, or no, Reagan started. No, yeah, you guys are dumb. You guys don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You're stupid, you progressives. Woodrow Wilson started the drug war, 1914. Look it up. Do some research. Debate me anytime, folks. That'll be fun. How come nobody ever wants to debate me, by the way? Wouldn't that be funny if somebody actually finally challenged me and then beat me in the debate? It could happen. They might have an off day. So progressives seek gun control is a form of progressive scapegoating, where instead of addressing the massive failure of a bunch of progressive policies, including government schools, to get to the root causes of crime and do something about it, no, they scapegoat the guns, because the gun is a piece of metal, right? And they scapegoat guns that are owned by private persons. So the key to understanding progressive scapegoating is that they have to scapegoat a non-governmental entity. So when Morning Joe talks about slavery, they're really waving the flag of white racism. They're not talking about slavery. It's a subtle signal to black people. Your enemy is white racism. It's not the fact that the government has oppressed you since 1865. Don't pay any attention to that big old ass government over there that regulates you and taxes you and creates a war on drugs that prevents you from having a gun to protect yourself in a dangerous neighborhood, and has like massive numbers of your young people in jail. No, it's that white guy over there, the old guy in the coffee shop having breakfast, tipping the waitress and chatting with the waitress. That's your enemy. It's like it's all a form of vicious, evil scapegoating. And I commend all of you to my books, because all this stuff's explained in my books. I've been thinking about this stuff for 50 years, and I think I cracked the code on a number of fronts. So trying to think. So I think I've talked enough. Let me just promo. It looks like the live stream is working. And if anybody spots anything on Telegram, I have a new channel on Telegram. It's called libertymovement.org. I'm on Rumble. I think Jim Ostrowski. I'm not sure how Rumble's organized, because I'm brand new to it. But if anybody can confirm I'm on some of these more obscure platforms that I haven't been using, let me know. But so I just want to end up with a promo, and then I'll shut the hell up. Keep talking all, boring everybody to death. So January 1st, I'm rolling out GOP scorecard. That's why I'm putting these platforms together. So I'm trying to get an audience of about 10,000 people. Either, not necessarily live, but go this way. Somebody, I don't want to scare this lady with the dog. So I'm going to go live at 2:00 on the 1st. It's you've recovered from partying and the football game hasn't started. You might be at a really boring party with friends or family, but you can sneak away, put on the cell phone and listen a few minutes and share it around. And then you can listen to it on recording. So it's GOP scorecard. I talked about it a little bit. I won't bore everybody to death, but it's a very simple statistic to evaluate how the GOP has done with their 100% control of the House. And they have some influence in the Senate, because the Senate's not a pure democratic institution, but just the fact that they control the House, they can stop spending and so on. And they failed, and government got bigger. And it's really just a way to show that the GOP is a fraud. And, sorry, don't shoot the messenger. If you love the Republican Party, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you that they made government bigger in the last year. And then you're going to, if you're a GOP diehard, you're going to give me all these excuses and all this bullshit. Hey, come on the live stream, because it's going to be a short program. I don't do super long programs, but if people want to talk, we can talk. But so there'll be a Q&A. You'll have a chance to say, hey, Jim, you've just proven that the government got bigger in the last year, but the Republican Party is still great. And if we just vote harder, blah, 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 blah. So the two factoids, I'll throw these two factoids out, and then I'll close. The one factoid is this. I love factoids. I know everybody's busy. Nobody reads. I'm trying to get everything down on like one sheet of paper, back of the envelope, back of a business card, tape at the refrigerator. And then if you want more details, it's all in my books. But here's two factoids that if you're going to debate me on these issues, take these factoids down and show that I'm wrong. One factoid: the last election that increased liberty overall for American citizens, and that's a term of art. I'm talking about American citizens, because there are groups that were not citizens or not considered citizens that were treated badly in American history. Everybody knows this. Do I look stupid to you? I don't know American history? I think I do. I got 102 in American history in high school. True story. The last election, though, that increased overall liberty for American citizens across the board was, guess what year that was? And I've been saying this for years. Nobody's contradicted me. And you might say, well, gee, Jim, nobody pays attention to you because you're just a clown. I don't think so. I think people do pay attention to me. I've got, hundreds of articles published. I have several peer-reviewed articles. I have 11 books or monographs on Amazon. I've written 4 Bar Association reports. So I think people do take me seriously. I'm not a member of the controlled opposition, so I don't get on, the big networks. I don't get big book contracts and all that stuff. I'm just plugging away here in Buffalo, New York, for the time being, anyway. Hint, hint. So 1800, last election. So if you're going to tell me that voting harder is going to increase liberty, it hasn't worked for 234 years. Wow. What's your argument there? What's your counter? I'm telling you what we're going to debate about. So you got like a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or a year to figure out how to beat me in that debate. Factoid number 2, progressive era comes in I'm in Shoshone Park, where I used to pretend to coach baseball. I also coach basketball, and that I wasn't pretending, because I actually know I know a fair amount about the game of basketball. Not too good on the X's and O's, though. I always had the best players on the court, though. I could judge talent. Always could, always will, in any field. I'm really good at judging talent. Whatever. Baseball coach kind of sucked. So progressive era comes in 1913 with the income tax, the Federal Reserve, and the war on drugs a year later. How many major programs, major or medium or even minor, frankly, I don't know. How many major progressive programs has the Republican Party repealed when they got power? 0. How long are people going to be conned by this fraudulent organization which crowds out what I'm trying to peddle, which is direct citizen action? Because that stuff actually works. Direct action actually works. The only form of voting that ever worked was the voting that, like, my ancestors did. After I'm not comparing anything, but my ancestors were serfs in Europe well after the Civil War. And they voted with their feet to come here. So that's the only type of voting that ever mattered in history, voting with your feet. Voting at the ballot box is, I get it. There's this form of self-defense voting, and there's this fantasy. If I vote and 78 million other people vote the same way, then maybe something will happen. I get it. It's a human response. I'm human. I get it. I know what it's like to be hungry. I'm a human. I know what it's like to. Sorry, I got to jog around the path here. I don't want to get him on my. I know what it's like to have a fantasy wish that some election sometime, and look, it's not physically impossible for close on this note because I'm almost at hurdle. It wouldn't be a violation of the laws of physics if an election increased liberty. It's just, and it's not impossible, and it could happen, I suppose. But here, let me close on a positive note. If you want elections to increase liberty, you should do direct action, because unless we pull our kids out of government school and do many of the other things that I recommend on my website, including economic education, particularly, because I think it's relatively easy to educate people on the basics of economics, so they stop being bamboozled by politicians. So I'm going to leave it at that. Really, just a test broadcast. It looks like I'm streaming on 7 sites, and we'll add one more. Need your advice on that. And see you on January 1st, 2 o'clock on all these platforms. But my main platform is Facebook. You can always find me there easy. And then at 3 o'clock, if anybody's interested, I'm going to shift over to Twitter. Do a Twitter space and see if I can get any traction over there, because I want to use Twitter spaces a lot more in 2.4 than in 2.3. So see you. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it.